Brilliant. What we will do is we will get started. So you're ready to go, Charlotte, are you?
I am.
Brilliant. That awkward kind of liminal space between the recording starting and everyone joining the Zoom has passed. So welcome. My name is Luke. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the W Club manager. We're delighted that you've joined us tonight. This was a really well received pack in terms of its popularity online, in terms of people engaging with our social media competition. We ran and someone won, buying packs and everything. So the tastings have been, all the tastings we've done since the start of the year have kind of steadily increased the numbers. So it's really great to see. So thank you for your support, and we hope you're enjoying them as much as I enjoy joining you all here for them. Throughout the night, we want to get you asking questions and commenting tasting notes in the chat. For those of you who just joined there a second ago, we have 3 bottles, one of Talisker Storm, the 8-year-old and the 10-year-old, which we'll be giving away as a competition. So one for the best tasting note, one for the best question asked, and one for anyone who tags the W Club in a picture with your tasting setup, so the best picture. So they will be given away and shipped out to you, and hopefully with you next week. So without further ado, you can come here to listen to me. You came here to drink Talisker and listen to Charlotte. So Charlotte, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely W Clubbers?
Indeed, I would. That sounds like a very hard phrase to say. W Clubbers. You did it very, very well.
I'm professional at it.
You're very professional, very practiced at it. Hello, team. It's so lovely to see so many faces all on one screen. I haven't done a Zoom one in such a long time, but there are so many of you, and I'm very excited to talk to you about Talisker. My name is Charlotte. I'm Talisker BA, although my official title is Malts Ambassador. So as well as majoring in Talisker, as my lovely colleague Colin likes to say, I get to look after all 28 malt distilleries within Diageo, so just a few to keep me busy. I've been in the role quite not that long at all, so this is week 6 for me. And although it's 6 weeks here, I have been working in whiskey for a fair few years now. My most recent role was within Milroy's of Spitalfields. I don't know if anybody does know it here, but give me a little wave if you know Milroy's, or hello friends, I can see some waving. This is what I like to see. Yes, beautiful sunshine in the background. Hello team, hello if you've ever visited me in Milroy's as well. Shout out to Milroy's, yes thank you, Milroy's crew. And I was there for well, good enough time to know pretty much all of the whiskies on the back bar. And when we say all of the whiskies, I'm talking about 800 to 1,000 whiskies. So I had a good time there. Whilst I was there, I would teach WCT spirits as well, and also ran a few women's whiskey nights as well. So if you're ever interested, do give me a shout on that. But we are here. Go on. Let's see, we are here to talk about Talisker instead. And I don't know what your setup is like at home, team. I've got all of mine laid out ready and waiting, just because I like to get excited, get my juices flowing when it comes to drams. But I don't want to just be chatting forever. So I think we should just get straight on in, and then we can have a little talk, a little chat, and then we can see what people are interested in knowing. Should we give that a try?
Sounds like a plan. And yeah, we are going in the order that they are in the card that you will receive the tasting pack. So we're starting with the 10, the 8-year-old Special Reserve, the Storm, and then the Distiller's Edition, just so people can make sure they're all in the in the right order.
Well, perfect. So we'll start with the 10-year-old here. And I don't need to tell you how to drink whiskey, although is this anybody's first time drinking whiskey? I'm going to try and scroll through people. Seems like everybody's had a dram or two before, is what I like to see. Shoot professionals, they can be teaching instead of me, to be fair. But let's go on with the nose, and what I'll probably do is let's have a little chat about the nose, and then I'd love to hear some tasting notes from you all when we get into it. Yes, there might be a little background noise. I am in my house and I have a lovely, very rowdy, big family just behind me. You might hear them scream. So apologies for that, but Zoom, we have to make do, I'm afraid. So should we get into Talisker 10-year-old? Okay, hands up, who here's had Talisker 10 before?
Well, I certainly have anyway.
Quite a few people, but I like going back to it. I like being able to take a second to sit and concentrate on it and kind of just remember what it's like. I mean, I say that I did have it last night on the sofa, but I like to have a second to smell and to really focus on what I'm tasting and maybe give a little thought about it. Going in on the nose, I love it because it's so iconically Talisker. I mean, whenever I think about any sort of smell, I always come back to this. It's such sweet smoke and sea salt, and that's very hard to say with the lisp, even harder than W clubbers. But it's so very inviting. One of my first whiskies I've ever had was a peated whiskey, and so it just brings back very fond memories of that first sip. So if you haven't already, have a little sip, and then I would love to hear some tasting notes in the chat here. Oh God, yeah.
It's has got a lovely nose to it. I know when we were running our online competition for giving away the bottles, we asked everyone to say their favorite, and the Talisker 10 was definitely well out ahead.
You're just saying that.
No, it's objectively true. You know, the figures are there.
The maths adds up. Well, I was going to say so I've just had the first tasting note come in, which is bonfire and roasted raisins. That is so wonderful, and clearly somebody definitely wants that bottle being sent out to them. That's a fantastic tasting note. I would always like to encourage people to check out the weirdest stuff. I've had for Talisker 10, I've had their DAPS, plimsolls, you know, DAPS from when you were in PE at school. They gave me that tasting note, which I adore, because there is no wrong answers, but there are a lot of right answers out there. And the weirder, the most personal, that's what it gets me. It is sweet. It's got some heat. I get so much fruit and orange combination. A combination of angel's tears and pure gasoline. I'm hoping that's a good thing for you, my bitch.
Well, I wonder how you benchmark, you know, obviously how you benchmark angel tears, like where in your life have you experienced that previously, that you can bring that tasting to the table. So that's interesting. Jason's very coastal and warming, reminds me of unpleasantly cold and windy days by the sea. So I don't know if that's a good tasting note or a bad one. Paul says spice, and Jace says charred wood and heather mixing with berries. So there's some interesting berries is a good one. It's not one I've personally heard a lot with this whiskey, but once someone says it, you can definitely see that kind of fruity sweetness as berries. Yeah.
You always try not to say I think and I taste this, but you end up doing, leading people down the garden path. If we do want to talk about berries, I find that leaving it out for maybe 10-20 minutes, sometimes I get blackcurrant, and what I mean by that, I get that berry note, but I also get that kind of, you know, drying tannic edge that you get with blackcurrants, you know, when it's quite tart and tannic. Not Ribena, I wish, but something a bit on that ilk. Ooh.
Yeah, and Christmas pudding. This is the Wiseman family. That's a good one. Gary says beautiful, deep, wholesome flavors, like a honeyed cigar. A honeyed cigar. That's really interesting, Gary. I like that one.
So evocative. Yeah, I like this. It brings out people in poets.
What's the ABV and the cask breakdown of this, Charlotte? Very
good shout. Let's get into what we're actually drinking. So with pretty much the standard ABV for Talisker will be 45.8%. And for those of you that, well, I guess weren't working in the old proof system, I mean, neither was I, but that comes out as 80 proof along with the old English system. The idea is that it was always traditionally put at 80 proof. And so when we're transferring over to ABV, it just made sense to keep it at what it transferred out as 45.8%. I get some people saying, oh my goodness, that's quite high. But I think it pleasantly matches. So we've had a few comments about spice. I think that the ABV kind of matches that chili, peppery spice and works together to enhance it. Breakdown of casks and what we're looking at. It's a 10-year-old. Of course, so we're looking at minimum of 10-year-olds in the barrel, and it will be around that age statement. So we won't be going much higher than 11, probably not even hitting 12 years old, but we are looking at all ex-bourbon. And refill, it's going to be quite close to first and second, not using so much third and fourth. We want that flavor to come out. And I hate to say it, we do see it in the color, but you know, I think we've got a load of that honey. We get a load of that. I get fudgy flavors, you know, like tablet.
Yeah,
and
definitely can see the tablets. Yeah.
And it very much complements everything that's going on in here.
No, it really does. We got some excellent tasting notes in there again.
I'm just watching them come in.
Brett says, reminds me of my grandparents' home. They're past. They were smokers, so I get ashy taste from the ashtray and the sweetness of Nana's baking in the air. That's interesting. I always say peat whiskies. I love peat whiskies because it reminds me of my grandparents' home. Neither of my grandparents were smokers, but they rural Ireland, and we had one stove that cooked everything and heated everything, and it was all turf powered. So everywhere they went, not just in the house, but even when you met them outside the house, the clothes, everything had that phenol turfy smell. So whenever a good whiskey reminds me of literally hugging my nana, and it sounds cliched, but it's honest. It's true. We got John says vanilla ice cream on a hot sunny day. That's interesting. Peppery soil, oddly, I like that one from Jay. And yeah, there's a few comments on the honeyed cigar, which is probably my favorite tasting note so far. My very first distillery visit years ago was Talisker. That brings back sweet and spicy memories. Spicy, interesting, Roger. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, spicy memories. I love this whiskey with its pure heat, smoke, and tobacco taste. Paul says, which bourbon distillery do you get your casks from?
Really great question. And it's a case of wherever we can get them from. I think it's much the same across the board. It'll be wherever's selling them, and honestly, whatever's at a good price. And I know that's kind of a very blasé answer, but there are so many to pick up. We'll be getting them from wherever and wherever.
Oh, fair enough. And Phil says goose fare, toffee apples, and candy floss for tasting notes. Graham says it was also his first distillery visit. And it was Carol's as well. So the Isle of Skye is one of my favorite places on earth. Simply sweet sea salt and smoke. John says Europe or USA. I'm not sure if that's back to the cat question, possibly. So the all, European or American oak, I presume he means.
Yeah, so it is all American oak, all ex-bourbon, so American oak, white oak.
Quercus alba. Yeah, there you go. Has COVID affected the sourcing of the barrels in any way? I've heard there's a risk of a shortage.
Oh, that is such a great question. There is a lot of problems affecting us at the moment. I don't think barrels are an issue. I think it's more, well, it's a combination with leaving the EU. It's really hard to pull one from the other because it happened at the same time. It's more, honestly, boring stuff like glass and cardboard, which is the main issue. Although something that we're a bit worried about coming up is the availability of grain going forward, because of course it's harvest time, and Eastern Europeans like Ukraine can't really harvest at the moment. So we'll be watching that going forward. But I mean, the lay-on effect, that's probably not going to happen for a few years anyway.
Yeah, that's the beauty of whiskey. You know, these problems are a future problem. It's also the problem.
Tomorrow's problem. We'll deal with that later.
Tomorrow's problem. That's for our kids when they're trying to drink 18-year-old Talisker, although we can't get that either at the moment. So.
Oh my goodness, you're preaching to the choir. If only. I have one bottle saved away, and that's probably in the event of a zombie apocalypse that I'm breaking that one out. It's too good.
Fair enough. Zombie apocalypse, I reckon that could be next year the way things are going, but we'll see.
What I'm really liking to see is how many people are saying it reminds them of Scotland or Skye. And I think you saying about smelling your grandmother, and that's just makes sense in my head, because every time I go near a fire, I smell it in my hair for the days afterwards. I love that whiskey is so evocative of memories and transporting you back. And I think we talk so much of, you know, food doing that, and everybody brings out the idea of Proust and his Madeleines and everything like that. But I think we should talk more about whiskey and how it brings people back to a really lovely time that they have. Because I mean, most often when we're drinking whiskey, we're sharing it with people and we're having an experience, or we're up on Skye and we're sitting on the pier, we're looking out over the loch, dangling our feet in the very cold water. I think it's just such a beautiful, like, yeah, bring back of memories.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's the beauty of when we share these tasting notes and everything, you know, it does, they are an incredibly personal thing, like, you know, which is why I don't like those really snobbish tasting notes that are like, I don't know what that tastes like. So, but with this, would you recommend adding a drop of water, given it's got that slightly higher ABV?
Absolutely, great question. I think it is whatever you're happy with. And I think it's a real personal thing. I find if you're leaving it out for a good period of time, it's kind of like knocked a bit of the ethanol out. I'm happy with it, but I love adding water just to see what happens. And I would encourage everybody, I'm going to be saving a little bit on the side that I will add a little bit of water with, or I can add a little bit of water to this one, just because why not make your own whiskey? See what happens. And hey, you could find the perfect ratio that you've never unlocked before. And you could be like, Christ, I didn't realize there was so many apples in here. Where did this come from?
Well, that's interesting, because I literally just add a drop of water, and you do get that vanilla apple really cuts through the smoke a lot more. And Bernard Phillips there says, I added some water and it went a bit too peppery for me. So there you go. I mean, it always is best to add the smallest bit and then keep going back, because you can always add all water. It's hard to take it away.
Such wise words.
Roger Till says, has Torabeg changed the approach Talisker has taken? And there was another question there about where do you source most of your grain from? So you could tackle those two questions, Charlotte. You said you have a high bar with offering to give away a bottle for the best question, you see.
They're looking for it. But I love questions. It's how we learn. And also, I might not have thought about talking about it anyway. The Torabeg question. With regards to it, a lot of changing of the packaging, which is stupid to say, but if you have an old bottle of portrait or an old box, it'll say the only distillery on Skye. So one, we have to change that up. So that's gone through a massive rehaul like that. I know that sounds really stupid, but that's the biggest change. Not particularly. I really like trying Torabeg because I like being able to sample something from the same island. Like I said, when we're talking about where does it remind you of, it does make me think of Skye, although I find it a bit more citrusy than Talisker. I think the citrus elements come out. And personally, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with Torabeg. I'd love to see how they develop, but not an exceptional amount. We just say now we're the oldest distillery on Skye instead of the only. When it comes to the grain, I'm just going to see what was the question again. It was
where do you source most of your grain? I think it was where are you getting most of your grain? Where from you are getting where are you getting most of your grain from, basically? Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't quite catch it. Essentially everywhere, because it's being put into, we put it all through Glenord, which is our main malting facilities. They'll be transferring it all there, and since it's such a massive facility that does feed into a lot of our other distilleries, it'll be just wherever we can get it from. The price is right. It's only with certain, and I think it's the same with a lot of distilleries, only when you say, hey, we're using Isla barley, that's where it's coming from. If the price is right, the price is right, and that's the matter of the fact, right? I wish we could give you a beautiful romantic story, but
Lee says, I've just tried both ways. Prefer this one without water. Graham says it's just a wonderful whiskey. I can't disagree. Luke says, love Skye, visited Talisker a few times.
yeah,
The oyster shack up the road is well worth the visit too. I imagine Talisker and oysters wouldn't be bad.
it's a good pairing.
Water really brings out the delicious peaty smoky. Port Rugi is fantastic. What distillery do you see as competition, or which do you admire the most?
That is a really good question. The thing is, I personally don't see any distilleries as competition because I'm in it for the whiskey, and I can't say that I want to compete with anybody. I want us all to lift. I want everybody to be whiskey drinkers, and I want us all to raise each other up and be like, oh, they're doing something really, really cool. Should we do something else that's really cool? Always something like anything peated, like honestly, Lefroy, the sherry cask 10-year-old. That's the sort of stuff that I'm like, that's really cool, and that's just like a lovely, almost like a core. What I would love to be, popping stuff like that out. Admire the most. That's a very good question as well. I think it's more which one I'm most nerdy about, and I hate to say I'm really nerdy about Talisker, but if not this, I haven't ever visited Springbank, and I would love to. So
Springbank's certainly flavor of the month at the moment.
Right.
Will we come on to the next one, the 8-year-old?
Yes, we've had a lot of lovely questions, and we haven't done enough drinking. So
yeah, and there's a few questions I want to come back to while everyone has a sip of that. But yeah, because the 10 is great, but we could be here all night talking about it.
100%. I'm so sorry. I've been too excited about it.
I think now's the right time to move on. So there's nothing. Before we move on, Chas says adding water brings out mint like toothpaste in a good way. That's another great point. So this one is 58 or 59.7% ABV.
It's too big, yeah.
So this is just a warning if you look at the label, because it obviously it's going to pack a bigger punch. So while we're having a nose of that and having a sip, Martin says, when did distilleries start using bourbon barrels, and what did they do during Prohibition?
Wow, that is a very good question. Bourbon barrels have been used for, that's a really good question, because in my mind, I've always just assumed that as long as we were getting bourbon into the country, that we would be using bourbon barrels. And the only reason I think that's because we think the same with sherry, with port, with any other fortified wine. If we're getting them in and we're drinking the good stuff down, then we might as well use them to finish them off. But that is a really great question, and actually that's sparked off my own curiosity of now I want to do a bit more research. We must have started like using our own virgin cask at some point. So absolutely fantastic question. I'm going to put a pin in that in a very high up.
I'd say it was probably in the 50s or 60s, I'd say. I mean, the kind of the strict rules around bourbon are relatively, compared to other whiskey laws, are relatively modern, at least post Second World War phenomenon, although the places were doing beforehand. And as I mentioned, Prohibition. So I'd say there probably was American oak used for a long, long time, but the idea of bourbon casks, I'd say, is a relatively modern thing. But I could be wrong there. That's just speculating. Because I know both world wars disrupted source of oak massively for Irish and Scotch whiskey.
100%, and I think it's about popularity, right? If whiskey is if home whiskey is so popular, why you wouldn't be importing so much bourbon, right? So you wouldn't have that many of casks around. But you're right, Prohibition did knock it for six, but then it's all about, like you said, the interplay with the world wars as well, and what we can produce. Talisker closed down throughout the war period just because of grain. And I guess that's more than needs must.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what's everyone think about this one so far? So Jay says Port Charlotte, anything heavily peated by Bruichladdich is my barometer for a relatively coastal peated whiskey. Lee says, what would your desert island whiskey be? We might come back to that one later on. That is a good question, though. We will keep that one. We'll bank that one. Ian says, this is my go-to for zombie apocalypse. Not sure, Ian, if you're talking about this 8-year-old we were just cracking into, or the 10, but I'm going to assume it's the 8-year-old special reserve. Do you want to tell us a bit about this, Charlotte?
Yes, indeed. So special release from last year. Special releases are released, as I say, every year, about the October period. And we have seen, crumbs, what are we on now? We have seen 4 special releases from Talisker. So not an exceptionally new edition, but we've had enough that we tried to shake things up quite a bit. This one is another 8-year-old. The first one released was an 8-year-old, but this has been put into heavily peated casks. So when we say heavily peated, we're talking about whiskey used from other distilleries that was heavily peated. I would not be able to comment on which distilleries they come from, but I'm sure we all understand what's in the Diageo family and what we have access to.
So Lefroy, okay.
I
Not
know.
Lefroy, it's Lagavulin, sorry, I meant to say Lefroy's not in
Gonna
the
say,
family.
you got the L one right, but yeah, I
Yeah.
knew what you meant.
They're
I
next
mean,
to
I
each
can't.
other.
But when we talk about Talisker, for some reason, I don't know what it is, but it's always been seen to be at its best at 8 years old. And I can't get to the bottom of who decided this as a way forward. But talking to the distillery managers and talking to the master blenders, they've just always said that is the way that Talisker, that's the age that Talisker is best. That's where it should be. Even to the point of if they've forgotten about barrels in the warehouse and they're over 8 years old, then they'll just put them to one side and not seeing them as worthy enough. So having 8-year-old Talisker is kind of that more traditional way of tasting it, young and vibrant. And I think this one is quite vibrant. I mean, we can taste it's more, you get that extra bump of peat, but also that cask strength, that ABV does push up that kind of spicy, peaty. Somebody said the 10-year-old was minty after water. I get a load of like eucalyptus, like that kind of,
yeah. I mean, I had this described to me recently as the Talisker for people who like Islay whiskies, and it is a good headline way of describing it, I think, from personally anyway. Gary says mouth-watering dram like smoked pear drops, creamier than a pack of custard creams, said David Brewster. Alliteration there. Paul says powerful nose, spice, cask strength, some chocolate in there for me. Definitely chocolate. I definitely get that. Yeah. Light, sweet, both the kind of the sweetness of the chocolate and the texture, but also the bitterness as well. Salted caramel ice cream, dry and ashy with slight sweet linger. Also a hint of old fabric, much sweeter than the 10. So yeah, some fantastic taste notes in there. Jason's creamy, musky toffee, retirement home in the best possible way. Let's not get existential. It's a bit early in the night. I'm getting Nurofen and wood glue. That's an interesting one.
it's your normal Thursday night.
Yeah, Nurofen and wood glue. Yeah, that's my childhood there. Sweet spot, says Paul. Jet fuel, says Steph. Jet fuel can be either way, go either way in whiskey. You know, it can be a positive or a derogatory comment. Lee says peppery toffee. So yeah, there's some fantastic notes there. Anyone that jumps out to you?
I'm liking the mix of stuff which is quite, say, gluey, but kind of solventy, but also the blending in of sherbet dip dab. We've got banana and kiwi in there, so it seems like you do get fruit in there. And I always think that Talisker, somewhere in it, you'll have a weird tropical backbone in it. If anybody's ever tried the 15-year-old special release, ridiculously tropical for me, and I can't work out why, like at all. But I love that kind of the balance of pretty much everything we've seen in there. That fruitiness, you've got the spice, you kind of have got that solventy, I say, glue flavor scent coming through. The pear drops from the nose. Positive, of course. They're all positive tasting notes. It's just such a, for me, this is a dram that does keep on giving. Somebody's just put in water brings out creamy apricot. I do get a load of stone fruits in here, and I would very much recommend trying some of this with water because it does unleash another fruity element to it. I think out of the special releases from 2021, this was kind of the one which surprised me the most. As you said, it's Talisker for people who like Islay whiskies, right? That kind of Islay note to it. And I like that. I like that kind of like step up in peat for Talisker. I think it's done well.
Yeah, definitely. Paul says, what cask types are used in this?
So it is purely refill X. So it'll be ex bourbon originally, and they have come from a very peated whiskey beforehand. Luke did mention some distilleries that it might have come from, but very peated Islay whiskey. So it's gained that. I mean, it's gained it. I must admit, I know with special releases, when they're doing fun cask finishes, it is for a matter of months. we're talking 6 months here. So it would have been in refill bourbon and then put into these. So the fact that it's picked up so much in such a short period of time really does like wow me. Yeah.
And what's the starting ppm for Talisker if this is kind of more smoky than the other ones?
No, such a good question. So ppm for Talisker, we use 75% peated malt, and that comes about 25, 35 ppm.
And that's pre-distillation, is it?
Yeah, pre-distillation, and we also blend it in with unpeated malt. So it works out pre-distillation at 18 to 22, if my maths is correct, but possibly isn't. But 18 to 22 pre-distillation, and then in comparison, we like to say like Lagavulin is about 45 to 55 ppm. So we're not punching up that high, it's more gentle. And when we were talking about saying it's like comparing it to Islay whiskey, we're talking about 2 different types of peat as well. As I said, we use Glenord as our maltings, and so the peat is gathered close by from Glenord. I've just forgotten the name of the peat area that we get it from, but it's an area which has a higher concentration of more kind of woody matter. So instead of getting that medicinal note, we're getting more of that charred note and almost, yeah, that charred wood note instead. So that's why it's coming through.
Adam has a great question about, you were saying about getting where you get your malt from, but in terms of barrel storing, does that, how much that is kept on Islay and how much that is on the mainland?
Another really good question. The storage at Talisker Distillery itself is quite slim. Even though we're just having a lovely big refurb, it doesn't include the warehouse. So only very select and choice barrels get stored there. If not, they'll be stored in the fantastic, massive storage warehouse over at Canvas on the mainland. And when I say it's massive, huge, you can drive for 15 minutes and you'll just be passing barrel after barrel, warehouse after warehouse. It makes you feel so small, but also so excited about how much whiskey is there. Just imagine, honestly, it's fantastic.
We got a good question from Jay there. Do you find that there's a difference having a dram straight from the barrel versus the bottle?
Personally, I do, and I don't want to get too nerdy about it because I've had some very interesting chats about whether bottle aging is a thing and if it affects it. But 100%, not just because, oh, you're in a really beautiful place when you've got a barrel and you're trying it and it feels almost hallowed when you're trying it in a dunnage or something like that. I think that, and this is just my personal preference, when I'm tasting whiskey, I love to open a bottle, put the lid on, shake it up, and then open it and let it breathe for a bit. I think that it just needs a second to take the edge off, or just to honestly oxidize a little bit. So I do think there are differences, but I think a lot of it is more down to setting than anything.
Mm-hmm. We got some great images coming in on the from tasting packs coming in on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So keep them coming, folks. Speaking of, you were saying experiences there and that side of things. There was a question there about the does the different storage affects the flavor? Less sea air, for example, obviously if it's being stored on island and off island and that kind of thing.
Another really great question, and I think that's a really nice thing to talk about. We have this beautiful romantic idea of something aging by the sea and it infiltrating and it creating these layers and elements of brininess, of saltiness, of that maritime flavor that we love to talk about and something that we love to see in whiskies. When it comes down to the genuine chemical composition, we don't ever find any salt in whiskey, which is a shame. It's more to do with what we associate the salty notes with. So when I think about it and when I'm thinking in a very straightforward, science-forward way, I don't believe they do. And yes, at least the amount of salt that is in a whiskey doesn't even register on our palate. So I think it's a beautiful romantic idea that we have, and And I love that romantic idea. Like I said, I get transported back to Skye every time I drink Talisker 10. But I'm afraid I don't believe it matters with the taste profile. What I do think matters most is, making sure that the temperature is correct and the humidity is correct, and keeping an eye on our casks that way.
No, that is interesting, and it is interesting that there's no salt in whiskey. We got one great question. There's actually lots of great questions coming in there, but I think we might be time to move on to the next one. Before we come on to the next one, this is the last question on the 8. Is what has caused the vast color difference between the 10 and 8-year-old? The 8-year-old's color is very clear compared to the 10's honey. I will throw in there, how often do you use kind of caramel coloring is my add-on to that, my appendage to that question. Charlotte?
No, please do. Very good questions, very pertinent questions when we're talking about whiskey. When it comes to the difference in colors between the two, in case nobody has any left, when I put like the 8-year-old in front of people, sometimes people say like, oh my goodness, that's light. But I think that's when people think that color makes an impact on whiskey flavor. Essentially, it is because we are using refill barrels. It's because we're using refill barrels and the extent we're using them. So when we're working with Talisker 10, or when we have liquid intent for Talisker 10, that's when we're going to be putting them to more active casks. And so we want that flavor to come out because we want that fudgy caramel honeyed note that we get from Talisker 10 when we're looking for it to go to other sources, maybe special release, maybe that has been laid down so it will be a 30-year-old at some point. That's when we're going to be using refill to like the 3rd or 4th degree. So when it comes down to caramel coloring, yes, we do use caramel coloring, and I think it is across the range, although just because I haven't made any note of it before. To the extent that we use it, I'm never going to be able to know that. They'll never trust me with that secret. But it's not to the degree of certain rum brands that are very, very dark in color when they're unaged, and we can't taste it. At least if we can, then hey, I'm okay with that because I'm still really enjoying Talisker 10.
Answer. Brilliant. So Storm is next. I hope that's not true because it's a lovely evening, but for the lineup.
Oh my goodness. So this is our only one, which is a non-age statement. And what makes Storm a little different to how we play around with the 10-year-olds is that we put them into heavily toasted casks. I'm going to assume that everybody knows what toasting is. Shout if you don't, and we can have a little run through it.
Do it for breakfast every morning.
Love a bit of marmalade on it as well. What we're going to be getting from it is just more intense spice. And with that spice, with that toasting, I personally think that it ups the peat, or what we can feel from the peat, just up another notch. So I think that everything just gets elevated to the nth degree. So I'm just looking at it, I should put it in front of me, to the nth degree. Ooh.
The nose is extraordinary on it. Yeah. I'm actually really dropped the ball tonight. I'm totally off my game. Must be the heat. I'm not used to this heat at all. But I meant to say that the obviously at the end of this, I'm going to be giving everyone a discount code, so they'll get 15% off all the whiskies tried here tonight. The Talisker, just for people's references while we're sitting away on this, the Talisker 10-year-old is £43. The Diageo 8-year-old special that we just tried is £90. But obviously you'll be getting 10% off that price. And the Talisker Storm Run now is also 43. So it's the same price on our website as the obviously the 10-year-old. But yeah, the nose is incredible. It's so fruity compared to the first two.
It is, but also I don't know if you've poured them out beforehand, but I've let mine sit, and I honestly do think I love to let them sit, and I think it's such a hard thing to do. Pour a whiskey out and walk away for 10, 20, 30 minutes, but it just releases something a little bit different.
I've often done it when I've had a few too many whiskies, and you walk back into the living room and you're like, oh, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, it's like finding a cup of tea, but only better.
Yeah, I don't know about a cup of tea, but yeah, I take your point.
What are you getting? Oh, smells like plasters. I kind of love that. When we were talking about that TCP note, it is that kind of like medicinal note, right?
Big time, yeah. Brian is as well is one that's come up a few times. Woodsap, says Jay, which is a great tasting note. It's an impressive, more sophisticated nose. Yeah, this. So Lee asks, why is the 8-year-old so much more expensive than the 10? I presume that's because of its maturation nature, its limited nature. It's the fact that it's part of. Do you want to explain about the wider special releases, if for people who might not be familiar with them?
Yes, of course. Special releases are released every year in October time, and they are a chance for us to do something a little bit different with our with our distilleries and get to showcase some things off a little bit more. Sometimes we'll put in a grain, and I think that's bloody brilliant when we do, because I don't think we talk about grain enough, but it just also means we get to play around with the cask type a little bit more. Putting Cardu in red wine casks, for example, just to see what plays on there. And we also get to just play around with the age statements as well. Something a little bit more special, a little bit more rare, although I say we produce a Lagavulin 12-year-old at cask strength every year, so that's something that I buy up straight away. But it just means that we get to see the distilleries in a little bit of a different light. And it's a little bit different to the Distiller's Edition that we'll get onto in a little bit, just because we get to play around a little bit more. So, for example, the 2020 release from Talisker was put into Jamaican rum casks. Fantastic. Be fun, play around with whiskey, see what flavors come out. Yeah, I would also love to have seen, I'm sure there were as well, all the ones that went slightly wrong, where they put them into casks and they came out and they're like, oh God, that's a bit crap, isn't it? But at least we tried.
It's like that one in Johnny Walker. The 8-year-old obviously is cask strength as well, which affects price points. On obviously you get less per bottle and also higher duty being paid per bottle. So yeah, there's some great tasting notes coming in. Fruit drops from David is spot on, says Greg. Jay says can smell water strangely. That's interesting.
Can I just say, sometimes I say I smell water, but I think it's something to do with minerality, and that feels like kind of a very snobby, almost wine sommelier thing to say, but minerality is such a flavor that I do pick up in whiskey sometimes, and I kind of feel that is on the same level, or at least that's how my mind works, but I don't know if that person.
Yeah, well, he literally just said, yeah, minerality it is, so there you go, you're on the same wavelength. Yeah, Eden says, I know we are not tasting Talisker Sky tonight, but what is the difference between Sky and Storm?
Great question. Sky is toasted casks again, but they're going to be of that third and fourth fill nature, so they're going to be less intense. And I do feel, because of that fact and just tasting Sky itself, the ppm of all the whiskey that goes into the barrels is the same, but it's much more relaxed and it's a lot more sweeter. And to be fair, I don't know if I'm saying the science correct, or if I'm just, reading into it more than I want to, but it is a lot sweeter and it's a lot more relaxed in the spice and also in the peat.
Lee's comments I won't be reading out, and I've got a very high bar for comments I won't read out. The Adam says, what happens to the bad casks?
You know what? That's a great question, and I'm happy to admit that I do not know. Who knows? And I do mean that. Maybe I do think that a lot of times they will be possibly put into a blend, and that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, they could even be put into a blend, like they could even be put into the 10-year-old. We'll never know, and just blend it out in that way. But I'm sure they won't be chucked away.
Nothing is chucked away. And with some of them, not just from your range, but any whiskey that's produced in a huge scale, there's so many hundreds and thousands of casks that go in that it has a massive equalizing effect. And obviously bad casks, it take a lot for a cask to go really that bad. It might not taste how you want it to taste, but very few of them will taste like
100%. And I mean, we're talking about single malts, but even single malts are blends at the end of the day, right? Whetstone, that's what I just read.
Yeah, Whetstone, that goes with that minerally one. That's a great one. Butterscotch and granite from Tony is a fantastic tasting note. That's up there. That's gonna be top 5 so far. Yeah, use bad cask for hand sanitizer. That's another great comment.
Fair is fair.
Yeah. Did Diageo do any of the hand sanitizer making during COVID, or was that only the smaller distilleries?
I don't believe they did. I haven't seen any from them. But then again, maybe I was just getting my hand sanitizer from the smaller distilleries or boots, unfortunately.
Yeah. I shouldn't be saying this, but a person I'm very close with, when hand sanitizer was really, really expensive at the start of 2020, and when the whole thing took off, every time they'd go out to the supermarket, they'd bring like empty hand sanitizer bottles and just like fill it at the door when they're getting on the tube, just fill it out in public and then bring it back. So for the next pandemic there, folks, that's a top tip. Save you spending think smarter, not harder.
That's true.
There you go. Marvelous. So there was a comment obviously with the difference between the Storm and Sky. What about the darker Storm in duty free? There's a question there about that.
Yes, darker Storm. I actually have a bottle around the house somewhere that I haven't even cracked into, actually. That's a really good point. I should do that this evening. Dark Storm is using more cracked and charred casks. So they will, what am I trying to say? They will char the ends of the barrels so that they have a more intense aging process. They'll char it to alligator char, so number 4. And so that will have a really, really intense aging experience on it, which gives you that more spice and that peppery. Yet again, ppm, exactly the same of it going in. It's just all the other layers and effect that kind of boost up that really intense, spicy, peppery flavor.
Mm-hmm. There was another fantastic question I meant to come back to, and I missed, but we'll come back to it now before we move on from this whiskey, was about the history of the distillery and how it got started. Could we touch a bit more on that? I can't. I'm going back to find the question, but thank you for asking that. That was a great question. They said they love to hear those entrepreneurial startup stories. So.
They are indeed. So it was Hugh and Kenneth McCaskill. They came across, they apparently sailed into Talisker Bay.
By accident, or?
You know what? I'm going to say it was very much on purpose. I'm sure you can't miss a big, although it would be a beautiful shipwreck story. Talisker Bay is unfortunately not by the distillery. It's about 6 miles along a very sheep-ridden path. The Talisker Distillery is on the edge of Loch Harport instead, which is the way you get into and access it by boat. But they came across it and they rented the land from the local laird, a MacLeod, I believe. And from 1830, they started up the distillery, and there was much uproar from the local clergy who did not want to have a distillery there at all. I mean, you can imagine that. And I'm afraid they seem like a little bit of baddies, as they forced a lot of local farmers off the land. But in doing so, they provided them with work in the distillery. And as much as I love a good story, the story of Talisker through the 19th century is pretty much an exchange of hands. My favorite part of that is where they built a port finally, because in my mind it's already set up with like a little port that they can dock in and out. But no, they were they literally were so limited in what they were producing because they had to sail the barrels out to the waiting ships. So you can imagine trying to unload these casks onto a rowboat and sail them out into the middle of the loch where the water was deep enough for this big boat to then lift them up. And actually that caused quite a few problems within the owners. They were like, this is ridiculous. If we can't build a port, and we can't increase our production because we can only transport so much of the island, then they just refused to be part of the distillery. But it joined hands with the Daoyuan distillery in the turn of the 19th century, turn of the 20th century, beg your pardon, and has some little pockets of lovely changes. So we changed from triple distillation in 1928. It was a very traditional form of triple distillation, which is why we only have 5 stills now. So 2 wash and 3 spirit. It was obviously closed during the war period. You can't have access to grain. But in 1972, and I think this is a really big change, which is why I love trying whiskey around the Talisker whiskey around this period, is we changed from our own maltings, and we also changed from direct firing to steam firing. So both had a very big impact on the flavor. I mean, one that we'll never be able to tell the difference now because this is what I've grown up with, but they would have changed the flavors massively.
Mm-hmm. No, it's fantastic. Paul says, I love hearing the history. Is very interesting. I must say that is always my favorite bit of these tasting, hearing those brand stories. They are so kind of crucial to our relationship with these whiskies. There was a question there about the different char levels across distilleries. I don't know if David Brewster has asked the question if they mean it across all distilleries or across distilleries within your portfolio. But do you have an idea on different char levels, or? I'm
trying to think of other. I'm very much trying to rack my brains at the moment, because I think it's a very good question over different char levels. But I'm just trying to think of other expressions that have used charring and recharred in their expressions. I'm going to say, because I can't put my mind to it, I wouldn't know at this point in time. I'm going to say when it comes to something like SDR and recharring barrels, then they're going to be much the same across the board. Just because it makes sense if we're going to be because we will get our barrels from the same place, that they will be much the same across the board. I think it's only in the exceptions of stuff like Dark Storm that I mentioned, where we char the ends, that'll be any different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say you're right. It's more the exceptions rather than the rules. I'd say it's fairly universal, especially with people getting from space, space at Cooperage or whatever. A lot of them sourcing from the same location. So yeah. Jameson Black Barrel, there's a great whiskey that's extra charred, very sweet. Marvelous. So I don't know if you're ready, or if people are at home ready to come on to the final whiskey of the night, the 2021 Distillers Reserve.
I'm very excited for
edition.
it. Yeah, I'm very excited for it. It's I think it's one of the first Taliskers that I truly just fell head over heels for. And this is during my tenure at Milroy's, because we always seem to have some of the Distillers editions on the back bar. The Distillers editions were, they were formerly the Classic Malt series, way back in the 90s. The company that was pre-Diageo picked out 6 of their distilleries where they thought that they were choice and most interesting, and they wanted to show them off. And that's kind of where the Distillers series has its heritage. And it seems that we just produce one near enough every year. And this is a 2021 edition. It's a 10-year-old, and it's been finished in Amoroso casks. And I know I'm not putting the beautiful intonation on that, Amoroso, but I think it's sweet, peat, juicy deliciousness. I absolutely adore this dram, and I would love to hear what your tasting notes on this as well.
Yeah, well, the color is amazing. David has called it lush.
Lush. Now I call things lush because I'm from Somerset, but that is a very good tasting note.
Don't know, that's not a big thick Somerset accent, but I would actually never have guessed.
I had to lose it at an early age. I worked in some very posh hotels, and for some reason people don't take you seriously when you sound very happy and like Somerset, but very much so when I go home. You'd hear it.
You just said capitalism stole your accent. That's terrible.
That's a story and a half.
This is oaky tannins. We have from Chas, sweet, rich, rounded. I know a few people like that. Tony Tony Kingsmith says OMG.
Yes.
John says apple struggle with the whipped cream.
I think it's supposed to be strudel, but I
Strudel.
like an apple
Yes,
strudel
sorry,
as well.
that was yeah, strudel. Apple strudel with whipped cream makes way more sense. This is what reading out comments when you're on your fourth whiskey is like. From the 2021, getting clean grape and raisin, but also malty dry grass mixed with oil, pepperiness and fruit, but also then chocolate and custard. This is good. Steph says smells beautiful. Roast coffee on the nose. Stephen, sweet hay, peppery, spice, sweet apples, nostalgic with wisdom. It's lovely. A bottle of this wouldn't last. Yes, there's some fantastic tasting notes in there. And yeah, like I said, I can't get over the color. It's a stunning color.
It's so rich. It's so vibrant. And it's kind of like that. Oh God, this is going to taste good. I've seen a really nice question about what's my favourite distillers edition, but I don't know if anybody wants me to say what Amoroso is, just because.
Of course, yeah. We were all pretending to.
No, I didn't mean to say at the time, but I realised I was talking quite a lot and quite fast about everything. Amoroso, and this is something that I had to do a good amount of research on. I'd never heard it before, like never at all heard it before. Amoroso seems to have this beautiful story behind it. It is essentially a blend of Oloroso and PX together. And so the very beautiful romantic story goes is that workers in the bodega, of course, that general bodega, workers in bodegas, as they were coming home for Christmas, they wanted to bring their wives a present. And Oloroso, whilst we see it as still on the sweeter side, is a dry sherry. And so they'd be bringing home jugs, because you just pick it up from the bodega that you work in, which I think is fantastic, filled with Oloroso, and they would ask just for a dash of PX in it to make it more lovable for their loves, the more amoroso. So it's kind of like a weird conjunction, but it's that kind of thing. It's a bit more lovable. It's a bit more of a lovable whiskey. It has got that nuttiness. I have tried Amoroso before. It's got that kind of nuttiness to it that you get from Oloroso, but that sweet figgy raisin, stickiness that you get from PX as well. And I think this transfers in here. We get like nuts. I get hazelnut.
That's a very romantic. Brought tear to the eye there, Charlotte.
I do try.
Wiseman family says, "What is PX?" Sounds like a graphics card.
If only somebody's put it in the very correct spelling in the chat a bit down, but it's Pedro Jimenez, which I can't very much do with my list, but I do try Pedro Jimenez, which is a very sweet type of sherry and made using Pedro Jimenez grapes as well. Very
good. There's a great Irish whiskey called PX, I Love You, which is, just your story reminded me of it, So James Brooks says, reminds me of the Port Rugi, which is my favorite Talisker. Bitter dark chocolate and smooth custard, baked apples, fruit apples on the nose, ginger at the far end. It's not very nice. Ian says Pedro Jimenez, sultanas and nuts. PX goes well with ice cream. It certainly does, Jay. I love a good PX with ice cream. If you're looking to replace your golden syrup, folks. This reminds me of my wife. She's a lovable nutter too, says Ian. So there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I suppose we can all be nutters. Definitely.
This feels like it's gone down very, very well. I think people have been. I was going to say, how many people, is this the first time trying the Distillers Edition? Hands up. Yeah, got some nods.
A lot of nods, yeah. Yes, is the Wiseman family, yeah. Gary says, yeah. No, it's great. There was a question further back, I've lost it now, but about is the color on this one natural?
It will have caramel color added to it in the same way that it does across the board, just because we need to make sure everything is correct. Like I said, how much I wouldn't be able to know, but it wouldn't be able to give us the red color that we're getting from this, that kind of almost ruby tint to it. That's something that is what I can firmly say definitely 100% natural.
Martin says, Martin Dry Scale, what food would you eat with this or other whiskey?
That's a great shout. With this, I think this does go very much hand in hand with dessert. ice cream might be a great. Oh, apple strudel would be a great. Or maybe just a very beautiful toffee sundae. This would be more something vanilla-ish on the side, something a little bit cooling, and maybe some fudgy chunks in it. I think that would go very, very well.
Ian's a man after my own heart. He said blue cheese with peated whiskey. I love a blue cheese with whiskey. Yeah, especially like if you get a peated that's also like a sweet finish, like a PX or something like this. Yeah, it goes fantastic. That kind of sweet, smoky cheese. Tony says sold out already, which it shouldn't be, Tony. It was there before when we started the tasting. So it's available from what I can see. I'll stick the link in the chat there in case there's any confusion about that. This one, I'll tell actually, now is probably the best time for me to share the discount code with everyone. So if you'll bear with me while I do a bit of admin, do you want to sing a song there or something, Charlotte?
Sing a song of sixpence.
This is 69 pounds. That's not a joke. It literally is, even despite your story. It's all coming together lovely.
I set you up well, what can I say?
Yeah, no, we're a good team. So there's the discount code, everyone, WST15VTD, and that will give everyone 15% off all the whiskies we've tried tonight. And yeah, if anyone is struggling for the Distillers edition, it's been linked in there, £69. David Brewster says, compared to the 8-year-old and the 8-year-old's Pete comes to the fore. So yeah, I suppose he's gone back and tasted them side by side. Lemon meringue said Roger Till, which is a fantastic tasting note.
Yeah, that's great.
Cigars of peated whiskey is a game changer. On the food question, before we move on from that, I do love a good like, I know it's a cliche, it's an obvious thing to say, but yeah, nice dark chocolate, like like a salted caramel dark chocolate kind of thing with
it's a great pairing. Plus it's nice to do the thing where you let chocolate melt in your mouth and put a bit of whiskey in at the same time. Probably a bit childish, but I kind of like that sort of thing.
Paul says, what happened to the 57 degree north?
I'm afraid that was just a very limited bottling that we did. I would love to see it back because I love to see cask strength Talisker about. I'm afraid it was just a limited release.
So Charlotte, we're not going to finish straight away, but as we come to the end, as we're on our last whiskey and we're sipping away, what's jumped out at you as your favorite taste note in question? I know what my favorite taste note was anyway.
I really liked the crumbs. Was it something in granite, banana and granite? Was it?
Oh, that was a good one, yeah.
And granite, that was it. That was very weird and very wonderful. I think we have seen some absolutely stunning ones tonight. I'm genuinely very impressed with how poetic everybody is and how good they are with, well, I was going to say with words, but also being able to pick stuff out.
Yeah, butterscotch and granite was a good one. My favorite one was probably the honeyed cigar.
Honeyed cigar. You know what? That's a really good shout because kind of like creeping tobacco notes are very delicious in it.
So I don't know how we. I mean, I suppose you're the boss. So I suppose we'll have to go with butterscotch granite. Well.
I feel like this is like a tiebreaker question almost.
Yeah. Well, I do actually have an extra bottle, so I'll make sure both commenters there get the chat. So if you want to just private message me there your email addresses, because obviously the names on the chat don't match. So we said butterscotch granite and honeyed cigar to be a bottle. And your favorite question?
Oh, probably about the casks a while back. I'm trying to scroll through everyone just in case one just pops out at me. Sorry, I'm just having another read through. I should have prepped for this one. Have any popped out at you, which were very good? Also, I realized we haven't answered the
haven't we answered which?
The Desert Island Dram or that one, but maybe.
Oh yes, the Desert Island Dram. So we could come. I mean, that is a good question. Although I think my favorite question was I actually did have a favorite question in mind that now I've
I know, right?
It's gone mad out. I was actually distracted by that Desert Island Dram. So I'll look back to the questions if you want to give your Desert Island Dram, Charlotte.
Okay, great shout. Desert Island Dram, I think if we're going to go for general, easygoing, and also, may I say, affordable, I would probably be going for something like, I'd say the Talisker Special Release 2020, that rum finish one, absolutely up there. I know we've seen a lot of like pineapple, we saw bananas, we saw like salted caramel. Those three just jump out at me, and I would gladly drink that all day on a desert island, except I would probably die of dehydration because it is cask strength, but I would have a very, very lovely time before it expired.
That is a good option. I must say, I was very lucky enough to try the Talisker 40-year-old.
What did you think?
I thought it was exceptionally good, and the 30-year-old. They definitely be up there with Desert Island Drams for me. I hate having to pick one dram. I mean, because it's a cliche, and I don't want to shout out another brand on the Talisker tastings.
No, I think the thing is that I have some. I hate to say I have one. I have like top 10. That's the problem, and it also depends on, like, I hate to say it, price. I've had an exceptional 38-year-old Kaolila XOP, which I would probably kill for a bottle for, but alas, I don't know when that bottle I'm ever going to see that bottle again. So I would go with the definitely readily available 2020 release.
Yeah, I mean that is what it's all about, because you could try some really niche thing that is amazing, or you try it in the right moment at some tasting and you think that's the most amazing thing ever. But it's the whiskey that you can buy in the supermarket that's not going to break the bank, that you can go back to every night. That's what you really want, you know.
100%.
A Talisker 10, am I right?
Oh my goodness, 100%. I keep a bottle by the sofa, but you know, Talisker Brand Ambassador, I need to, right?
Exactly. I did like the Cask question. That was the one question we probably didn't give a satisfying answer to, but I love questions that aren't like ludicrous, that you wouldn't, wouldn't expect you to know, Charlotte, but that do kind of play on, help us question why certain things that are taken as normal. I mean, it's most, like 80-90% I'd say of Scotch is matured in bourbon, but obviously wasn't always the case. So it does make you think about it. So that would be my personal one, but I don't know about yourself.
No, that was the one I was trying to remember back to. And like you said, couldn't give a satisfying answer, but it's genuinely sparked curiosity in me. So I will be going to look that up, and I'm really interested in that. That's such a good question. Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, that one. Yeah.
There you go. So drop us a DM there. Whoever asked that one, I'll find that question. So yeah, I don't know if there's anyone else has any kind of parting thoughts before we kind of call it a night. We're a little over, nearly coming up to an hour and a quarter, so probably a good time to kind of park it. So anything you want to share before we finish, Charlotte? I know I've got a bit of housekeeping to do.
I don't believe so. I think we've seen some absolutely, and I do mean it, some stunning tasting notes. Sometimes it's hard to get some participation, so it's wonderful to see so many people putting in the group, and also just the variety, and like clearly some memories have been like sparked, and I love that section as well.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely, definitely. So I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Charlotte. So genuinely, thank you for joining us, and we hope we'll have you back at some point for another tasting.
That would be wonderful. We have got a lot of other distilleries out there. Yeah,
definitely, and we could do maybe some in-store tastings as well with you guys. With you. The little bit of housekeeping I have is Ailsa Bay Deconstruction goes on sale. I'm hoping Monday, it might be Tuesday. So keep an eye out for that. It's coming in this, which is our new packaging for our tastings going forward. So it's in a foam insert, so it'll be different than the ones you would have received the W Club or the Talisker tasting in. So this is our new packaging going forward. It's much improvement, if you ask me. And the There's a Glen Scotia Global Gathering tasting pack on sale on the Members Hub at the moment. You will have got a meeting about it. That's obviously not being done by Digital Drams like this one is here. It's being organised by Glen Scotia as part of the Campbelltown Festival, but W clubbers have the option to join. And we're the only place outside of Glen Scotia themselves where you can buy a ticket for this tasting within the UK is from us, or so I'm told anyway. So that's excellent. So yeah, that's what I can think of as the housekeeping. We'll be sending out the recording tomorrow along with the discount code, but I'll actually send out the discount code tonight as well, just so everyone. Sandy's as well. So next tasting, it's Ales of Bay, so it's a deconstruction of that. They're a relatively new brand. Their Sweet Smoke 1.2 is the one, and we're trying 4 cask strength cask components that are not available anywhere except on this tasting. They're all the components that go into making the Ales of Bay. So definitely worth getting on, especially if you're interested in some of Charlotte's answers there about cask maturation and different elements. You can taste all the different elements and how they come together in the end. So Stephen Fisher is actually ending the night with a Talisker 18-year-old. So look at you, Stephen. Fair play. That's brilliant. And those of you tonight or tomorrow, I'll pick the winner for the social media side of things. I might send some of them on to you for thoughts, Charlotte, as well. So we'll get on to you probably tomorrow morning with who's won. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again, folks. Thank you again, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant. Have a good night. Bye.
Night, Dean.